Well, let's go back to the landscape first. When I started making serious photographs after I got through the photojournalism stuff and so on and got back on some kind of track, I was really sort of trying to work in the tradition of Miner and Edward and Ansel. And I used to go out daily with Paul Caponegro. We lived together for a while. And we would go out into the various parts of New England and photograph. And he would always come back with wonderful landscape pictures. And I would always come back with mosquito bites and halfway decent pictures. But it took a long time for me to understand that was not where I was going to be able to function in terms of expressing what I needed to express. Because I didn't know any other way. There was no other way open to me but that tradition that I inherited. And so until I found myself getting smaller and smaller and smaller in terms of the parts of the world that I was looking at, and closer and closer and closer, that I began to understand that I wasn't really interested in this landscape as a picture, though I loved the landscape. It wasn't that was my picture. And so I began to be making pictures that were smaller and smaller and more abstract. And that led me to then looking at things in the city that fit some peculiar thing which I can't explain. But it had to do with light. It had to do with shapes and forms and surfaces and how they affected me the same way those things did in nature. But it turned out that for me, it was easier, if that's the right word, or at least I was more responsive to, maybe both. It was easier because I was more responsive to these kinds of things, which I couldn't explain to anybody, but they seem still to fit into the tradition that I inherited. As I'm working out there in the world, my process is essentially the same in terms of the technology. All these things lead me to further and further looking inside rather than outside. So it was clear to me that, I was fighting something that was absolutely alien to me being out there in the landscape. The idea of the landscape still appealed to me, as it still does. But it took a long time to realize that what that was really about a picture, not about being in the world. And there is a ritual that just develops over the years. You go into the studio, in my case, I go into the studio and I do everything I can to avoid getting started as part of the ritual. I have no control over it. It's just the way I finally figured it out. That's what happens. I go in and I do all sorts of turn the radio on, make coffee, decide which music I'm going to listen to, and answer the phone, check the email. It takes an hour for me to get settled in. And then I literally go to my table, which is just covered with stuff. And I just, at random, pick something and start playing with pieces of paper to see if something comes together. More often than not, I keep throwing these things away and throwing them away and starting over and starting over and starting over, and then I get something I think is going to begin to work, and then I start, as I said to you earlier, make an exposure, change the lights, change the configuration, and keep doing that, making prints, laying them out on the table, watching them develop in terms of what the picture is, and keep responding to what I'm seeing as to what I should do next. So, as I say, the way I say it is that the material and the pictures themselves tell me what to do. And it's true, it's not unlike what a sculptor does or a painter does, or I think a composer does. You get a tune or a few notes and you put them down and and some composers do it right away and some composers do it the way we do, which is to write it down, tear it up, start over again.